A teenager doing homework vanishes in broad daylight.
She sat on her front stoop of her house, and she just disappeared.
A desperate search. Then, a gruesome discovery. Sophia had been murdered.
It was a total loss of innocence in this county.
It felt like somebody was reaching down inside your throat, ripping your guts out. We had absolutely nothing.
Until microscopic evidence led to an arrest.
The whole community breathed a sigh of relief.
But while Sophia's alleged killer sat in jail, 2 more girls were found dead.
The crimes appeared to be essentially identical.
Was the wrong man behind bars, while her killer roamed free. Tonight, we're on the case in Spotsylvania, Virginia, a small community halfway between Washington, D.C. and Richmond. The town became the setting for a terrifying mystery when a teenage girl vanished in broad daylight. Her disappearance was the beginning of a nightmare that would last for years. Spotsylvania was a sleepy little town. The kind of place where children played in their front yards without a care in the world. Violent crime was unheard of. That is, until September 9th, 1996, when police got a call from a frightened mother about her missing teenager. She had disappeared while doing her homework.
Her daughter was missing. There was no sign of her. The last time that she was seen, she was on the front porch of her house.
Her parents told police a terrifying story. Their 16-year-old daughter, Sophia, had gotten home from school that day and checked in with her older sister inside the house. She fixed herself a snack and went outside to study.
She went out and sat on her front stoop of her house to do some homework and perhaps listen to the radio, and she just disappeared, vanished.
It didn't make sense that she had just off and left and not said anything to anyone. But again, there could have been that possibility that maybe she did, and she's going to come back. She's going to be, she's going to come back home and everything's going to be fine. As the hours went by, we were worried. We were worried.
By the time the Silvas called police, they had already checked with all of their daughter's friends, and none of them had seen Sophia.
The Silvas were a very close-knit family, and they knew their daughter Sophia very well. When she wasn't at home when she was supposed to be, they knew something had to be wrong.
When investigators arrived at the Silva home, what they saw on the porch could have been a snapshot taken on a normal afternoon. The only thing missing from the picture, Sophia. There was no sign of a struggle. Her book bag and open notebook sat undisturbed.
It was sitting right at the front door, along with a grape soda, where she was sitting out doing her work.
Sophia's sudden disappearance didn't make any sense. She was a responsible girl, loved by everyone who knew her.
My wife actually taught her in 4th grade. Now, she was a beautiful child, an excellent child, and a good student. No, it was totally unlike her.
She never went off without saying something. She never came home late. She was a very good girl. They knew right away that they had to start looking for her because she was not safe any longer.
Investigators went door to door around Sophia's neighborhood. A number of people had been at home that afternoon, but no one remembered seeing anything out of the ordinary.
It was very frustrating when we started wondering, did she just go off with somebody? For someone to take someone with people playing in the roadway just a few houses down. Neighbors out in their yards working, Pam inside the house, and not to hear a scream, a car speed off, just not to hear anything. It's like she just vanished. No one heard anything.
The next day, police mobilized a huge team and used every possible resource to find Sophia.
There was an all-out search. We had made flyers. We had ground search teams checking the woods. We had helicopters. We also put divers in the water to check these ponds in the area.
And each day that passed without a lead made investigators more certain that Sophia had been the victim of foul play.
For 5 weeks, law enforcement followed up on leads, chased down clues, looking desperately for poor little Sophia. They couldn't find her anywhere.
It felt like somebody was reaching down inside your throat, ripping your guts out. You were spinning your wheels every day. You thought every day, okay, today's going to be the day. Today's going to be the day. It was so frustrating because we had absolutely nothing.
Then, on October 14th, a call came in from a neighboring county. As workers tried to clear obstructions from a stream that was flooding, they made a gruesome discovery.
When they went down there, they found a bundle, and that bundle had painted toenails sticking out of it, and they knew right away it was a person.
When Detective Lunsford heard that the body of a young girl had been found, he headed to the heavily wooded creek bed, fearing the worst.
I saw a lot of people with their heads down. I saw people shaking their heads. I saw investigators that I've known for years crying. Because we knew that it was going to be her. She was the only one in the area that was missing. And in your heart of hearts, you just knew. You knew.
Sophia's body had been found, wrapped in a blue moving blanket and tied with rope. It had been dumped in the creek weeks before.
When the police found Sophia's body, they realized right away from the way her clothes were on her body that although she was completely dressed, she had been disrobed and redressed after she was dead. She'd been then wrapped in a blanket, like a moving type of blanket, and tied together with rope. Her body was just discarded off the road just a few steps in this messy water place.
Dental records confirmed what investigators already knew. The victim was 16-year-old Sophia Silva. The medical examiner couldn't determine an exact cause of death because her body was so badly decomposed, but he gave detectives a time frame for her murder.
The medical examiner came to the conclusion that she had been there at least 4 weeks and up to 5. So it was very possible that she'd been held captive for a day or two, but certainly nothing more.
Detective Lunsford now had the grim task of breaking the news to Sophia's family.
When I pulled up, I didn't have to say anything. Everybody just started embracing each other.
Sophia was dead, the victim of a sadistic killer. Detective Lunsford had known Sophia and her family for years, but now he had to put aside his personal feelings and hunt down her murderer.
I had to make a decision to bury that emotion. Just get rid of that emotion and do what I needed to do to find the person that killed her. That's what I focused on. Now it's game time. It's time to find the person that hurt you, Sophia, and I'm going to do it.
Detectives went back to the beginning, to the day Sophia disappeared, looking for clues. There had been no evidence of a struggle, and no one heard a scream, including her sister Pam, who was inside the house. Investigators believed it was possible that Sophia may have willingly left with her killer.
Because Pam didn't hear anything, because no one else heard anything, maybe she knew this person. So, we start looking, you start close to home and you work your way out.
Investigators interviewed Sophia's family and were able to quickly rule them out as suspects. When they went door to door questioning neighbors, one name kept coming up: Carl Rausch. The 44-year-old handyman had a criminal record and lived down the street from the Silvas. He had a negative reputation in the area.
He was known to drive around the neighborhood in an old van and kind of leer out the windows at girls and children.
Several neighbors told police they had seen Rausch talking with Sophia just days before her disappearance.
We started looking at Carl Rausch, who lived down the street, basically getting information from the person that he was living with, giving us information that he had seen Carl talking to her. He had seen him, as she would, walk in the neighborhood, he'd seen her talk to her. And then when we started talking to Mr. Rausch, he's like, I've never seen him before in my life. I haven't talked to her. But you live 4 houses down. You mean to tell me as she's walking down the street that you've never seen her before?
Detectives asked him to come to the station to take a lie detector test. He refused. But investigators were able to obtain a search warrant for his vehicle.
I took carpet fibers from the car. I took hair from the car. And there was also like some purple flakes that was in the carpet.
Investigators believe the purple flakes may have come from the purple nail polish that Sophia was wearing. They hoped the fibers would be a match to the ones found on Sophia's body. The evidence was sent to the crime lab in Richmond to be analyzed.
They took those items from her and the items that I collected and examined them for comparison.
Detectives then went to the apartment where Rausch had been living at the time of Sophia's abduction.
There were similar type moving blankets that were used that Sophia had been wrapped in, and also some twisted, almost like a hemp type rope.
For investigators, it was all starting to add up. Then, Detective Lunsford got the call he had been waiting for from the Virginia Crime Lab.
I'll never forget that call. The examiner called me. She said, I've got good news. I was like, okay. She said, all the items match. We were like, here it is. We're done. We're done with this person being able to ever hurt another girl in our county. We've got him.
As far as investigators were concerned, it was a slam dunk. They had their killer. Carl Rausch was indicted for the murder and abduction of Sophia Silva. As prosecutors began to build their case against him, Rausch was picked up and placed in jail on an outstanding warrant.
He jumped bail on a felony shoplifting charge, and he pleads guilty to that charge and signs up for a year in prison without parole.
He was arrested, but on another lighter charge. They didn't immediately charge him with murder because they didn't have to. They could keep him locked up on this shoplifting charge while they investigated and made sure they had enough evidence to convict him.
With the presumed killer behind bars, Spotsylvania once again began to feel like a safe place to live.
When Carl Rausch was put into jail, the whole community breathed a sigh of relief.
I believe the community felt a lot of relief that this person had been caught, or we knew who this person was, we knew who was responsible, and they wouldn't have to worry about this person hurting their child. So there was a lot of relief. A lot of happy investigators at that point.
But that relief wouldn't last long. On May 31st, 1997, a call came in from a man named Ron Lisk. His 15-year-old daughter, Kristen, and 12-year-old daughter, Katie, were nowhere to be found.
2 girls, 2 sisters were missing. Not that far from where Sophia had been abducted from. But both sisters were gone. No trace. Vanished, just as Sophia did.
Their father had come home to find their school books in the yard, the front door open, and a glass of chocolate milk on the counter.
Both girls had gotten home from school. The alarm to the house had been deactivated. Kristen liked chocolate milk. She had made a glass of chocolate milk. She had changed her shirt from the shirt that she wore to school. And they had placed a water hose into the pool, and that water was running still in the pool when the deputies arrived on the scene to take the missing persons report.
Other than the fact that his daughters were missing, nothing else seemed out of place. There were no obvious signs of an abduction. When Detective Lunsford arrived at the scene, he had a sick feeling that he was experiencing déjà vu.
Nothing again, just like Sophia's case. Nothing in the grass. Nothing damaged inside of the house, like there would have been, some type of struggle inside of the house. There was just no evidence. Again, the 2 of them vanished.
Once again, the Spotsylvania County Sheriff's Department mobilized an all-out search for the girls.
It was ground searches, air search, passing out information. We were going right back to what we had done with Sophia.
The police responded right away and took it very seriously. Not only did they have a previous abduction on which to base the seriousness of this case, but these 2 girls were a little bit younger, and it was 2 of them at once.
5 days later, highway workers repairing a bridge 40 miles away made a shocking discovery in the water below.
Some highway workers were down in the area of this bridge just outside of Spotsylvania into Hanover County. It's a bordering county of ours. And said that they had found, at first they said it appeared that there was 2 mannequins in the water. When deputies got out there, it was clear that it was 2 young girls.
The bodies were identified as Kristen and Katie Lisk. At the medical examiner's office, they discovered fibers and hair on both of the bodies. For investigators, the crime was too eerily similar to Sophia Silver's murder to ignore. Young girls from the same town, around the same age, taken from their front yard after school in broad daylight. No screams, no signs of a struggle, no witnesses.
The crimes appeared to be essentially identical. The 2 girls were abducted from their home suspiciously. They just vanished. Their bodies were dumped in water, wrapped in a similar fashion.
The way that this happened, with them, the 2 of them, all of a sudden just vanishing. Again, there no evidence, no sign of a struggle. Nobody heard anything. There was a neighbor next door to where they were taken from. That person was outside of their home, didn't hear any screams, didn't hear any cars. No one saw anything. That's when we start thinking there's got to be some kind of connection here.
But how? Carl Rausch couldn't have committed the Lisk murders. He was sitting in jail when the girls disappeared.
Spotsylvania rocked when news of the Lisk girls' disappearance hit them. They had all settled down, were feeling fairly safe now that Carl Rausch was locked up, and everyone thought that he was responsible for Sophia's killing.
Either he was innocent or the killings were not related. Something didn't seem right. The Virginia Crime Lab had linked evidence collected from Carl Rausch's van to Sophia Silva's murder. But now, investigators had to take a second look at that evidence.
You have that sick feeling in your stomach that we've missed something. But you know, until that point, as a prosecutor, I'd never had a reason to question the Virginia Crime Lab.
The fiber samples were sent to the FBI for re-examination. A month later, the FBI reached a shocking conclusion.
The news that we received from the FBI lab was that the evidence that we had from Carl Rausch was in fact not a match. Didn't match anything. There was no match at all between Carl Rausch and Sophia Silva. No forensic connection between the two.
It was devastating news. The state examiner had made a huge mistake.
It was kind of flabbergasting. I mean, again, I'd never seen a lab mistake, much less one like that before. The lab analyst for Virginia had developed what's called tunnel vision, and she had seen evidence that just wasn't there because she wanted to solve this crime so badly.
The unbelievable turn of events sent investigators back to square one. The case that once appeared to be solved had to be reinvestigated all over from the beginning.
It feels like the wind's been knocked out of you. You no longer have anything. Now you're right back to where you started with when Sophia first disappeared. We had nothing again.
The fallout from the mistake destroyed careers. The analyst from Virginia's crime lab was fired, and Spotsylvania County was left to deal with the aftermath of falsely accusing a man of murder.
Even before I could react, Sheriff Knight had scheduled a press conference to announce on the courthouse green that we made a mistake, that Carl Rausch wasn't the guy, and that the charges against him were going to be dropped.
The examiner was wrong in the evaluation of the Silva case evidence as it pertains to Mr. Carl Rausch.
And the FBI crime lab had more stunning news. The fibers found on Sophia Silva matched those found on Kristen and Katie Lisk. The two cases were connected, and investigators had to face the possibility that they had a serial killer on the loose.
The conclusion of their analysis was clear. Someone killed all three of those girls, and now they needed to find out who that was.
Detectives were back at square one, and you could feel the fear throughout the community.
Everybody was on edge because this person had gotten away with 3 murders, and you're wondering where he's going to rear up next. Where's the next one going to happen? Because with these type people, you just know it's a matter of time.
From that point on, parents in Spotsylvania County never let their children out of their sight. Children couldn't play alone. They couldn't go outside and play without adult supervision. It was a total loss of innocence in this county.
Investigators from Spotsylvania, the state of Virginia, and even the FBI banded together to form the Silva Lisk Task Force.
Police followed lead after lead after lead, and none of them went anywhere. They were coordinating investigations with investigators all over the country, people looking for similarities between the crimes in Spotsylvania, the crimes as far away as the state of Oregon, down in Florida, up in New England, trying to figure out where they could find whoever it was that was doing this.
That person that we knew we were dealing with was a calculated serial killer. I mean, he was cunning. He planned. He calculated things. He wasn't stupid. and he wasn't going to do anything stupid. He knew what he was doing, and he was good at it.
As the months turned into years with no arrests, Detective Lunsford began to accept the terrible truth. The killer would never be found unless he struck again.
I thought, you know, this guy, he got away with it. He got away with it, and what's going to happen next? Where's the next victim going to be?
5 years later, and hundreds of miles away in Columbia, South Carolina, the Lexington County Sheriff's Department received a call. A 15-year-old girl had disappeared from her friend's front yard. Her name was Kara Robinson. The friend told police that Kara had offered to water the plants in the yard while she got ready for their day at the lake. But when the friend came outside, Kara was nowhere to be found.
She couldn't see Kara anywhere. But what she did see was that the hose was laying there on the flower bed. That's when she started to panic, and she contacted her mother right away. Of course, her mother then contacted Kara's mother to try to find out what happened to Kara. And nobody knew, so they called the police.
When police arrived, they found no evidence of a struggle and no sign of an abduction. But they did find a witness, a neighbor who had seen Kara talking with a man.
Another gentleman in the neighborhood said that he'd seen a car, described the man who got there with the car and talked to Kara, and he felt like Kara had voluntarily gotten into the car.
Kara's mom insisted her 15-year-old daughter would never get in a car with a stranger.
She knew her daughter was not a runaway. She knew her daughter had not done anything wrong. She knew somebody had kidnapped her daughter and was holding her against her will.
As the hours began to pass with no sign of Kara, she was officially listed as a missing person in Lexington County.
That night, there was a lot of worry. There was dying hope, and the police were beginning to think about the serious possibility of foul play.
And as the night wore on, the hopes of finding Kara Robinson alive began to fade. But Kara Robinson was still alive. She was trying to survive a nightmare that began when she was outside her friend's house watering the plants. Kara still remembers every detail of that day like it was yesterday.
I noticed a car on the way out of the neighborhood. It's a Trans Am. I was like, God, I like that car. I wish I could have one like that. And didn't think anything else about it.
When the car circled back and pulled into the driveway, Kara wasn't at all suspicious. When the driver got out, he appeared to be perfectly normal.
He was just your average, everyday guy. He was, you know, clean cut. He had on a baseball cap, but it wasn't pulled down low over his eyes. Just normal, everyday, middle-class, white American male. Just nothing scary about him.
Kara says the man approached her and asked her if her parents were home.
He walked over to me. He kept a respectable distance away from me. He came up to me. He had some magazines in his hand, and he said, "Hey, I'm trying to distribute these pamphlets and these magazines to some people in the area. And are your folks home?" I said, "Well, this isn't my house. This is my friend's house." And he's like, "Okay, well, what about her parents? Are her parents here?" And I said, "No, her mom's at work."
The man moved alongside of her and pulled out a gun.
And he came around with a small weapon and told me not to make any noise. He said, "If you scream, I'm going to shoot you." It was a very small gun that he could pretty much conceal in his hand. He said, "Don't struggle, don't fight, don't make any noise. I'll shoot you." And he said, "Walk with me to my car." And I walked with him to the car.
Kara says she considered running or fighting, but
I thought several times throughout the incident about doing something, but it always came back that he could probably overpower me. I was much too small to fight him.
Carefully concealing his gun, the man led Kara to his car. Everything was happening so fast, she didn't have time to react.
He opened the driver's door and put the seat forward, and I saw into the back seat. In the back seat, there was a large Rubbermaid container. He said, "Get in." I said, "Where am I supposed to go?" He said, "Get in the container." So I got in the container.
Kara followed the man's instructions and braced herself for what was about to happen.
I knew that he had intentions of kidnapping me and keeping me. I had a pretty good suspicion, people don't kidnap young girls to take them to the park or, to do anything nice. I knew that most likely he was going to sexually assault me. I knew that he was planning on keeping me for a while. But I knew that I was smart, and I knew that I was going to be able to outsmart him in some way. I think a supernatural calm kind of came over me, and I knew that I was going to escape. There was not a question in my mind.
As Kara lay inside the container, her captor, after about 10 minutes, the car suddenly stopped.
The first time he stopped, it was probably about 5-10 minutes maybe.
Her abductor lifted the lid off the container, handcuffed her, and bound her legs. Then he gagged her and started driving again.
He drove a little bit further. He got out of the car and he told me that he still had his gun and that I was not to make any noise or he would hurt me.
Lying in a fetal position, trapped inside a container, Kara could feel the car stop. The kidnapper dragged the container back to his apartment and removed the lid.
He told me that he would always have the gun and I couldn't scream. I think that, honestly, I think he would have killed me.
At that point, the man untied her legs but left her handcuffs on. He led Kara into his bedroom. She was terrified, but surprisingly, he took out a pen and paper and began asking her questions.
How old I was, what my name was, questions about if I'd ever used drugs, if I'd ever had sex before, if I had a boyfriend, just questions about me and my life, and recorded down all the answers.
Kara was taking notes of her own. She noticed things around the apartment that made her believe a woman lived there. While she tried to commit all the details of her surroundings to memory, she also did everything her captor ordered.
Because the more I could put him at ease and get him to let his guard down, the more likely I was going to have a chance to get out of there.
After Kara's attacker was done with his questions, he repeatedly raped her throughout the afternoon and evening. He attached her to the bed with handcuffs. He also tied one of her legs with a rope to the foot of the bed. He then lied down next to her and went to sleep. Kara was emotionally and physically drained. The strain was unbelievable.
And I started really just having a full-on anxiety attack. Couldn't breathe. Just out of nowhere, my heart was pounding. And I'm sure I was crying. All of that combined with the physical and psychological, emotional exhaustion that I felt, I did eventually fall asleep.
Several hours later, Kara awakened to her abductor lying next to her.
I woke up and he was still asleep. I could hear heavy breathing. There was a little bit of light coming through the window, very early morning light. And I knew there was not going to be any time that his guard was lower than it was at that point. and I knew this was it. This was the time to go.
Amazingly, Kara was able to slip her tiny wrist out of the handcuff. With her free hand, she tried to unhook her leg, but then her captor stirred.
I stopped what I was doing again and listened. And he was still breathing heavy, still asleep. So I kept on going. Eventually, I was able to unhook my leg from the bed, and at that point, slowly slid out of bed.
Once out of bed, she found her shorts and one of her attacker's t-shirts. Quietly, she moved towards the front door, but when she got there, the way out was blocked.
Front door was kind of in an alcove, and inside of that alcove was a coat closet. That rubber container, plastic container, was sitting in the alcove, and things were kind of falling out of the closet, so it was blocking the doors.
Kara knew it might be her last and only chance at survival.
I kind of steeled myself and took a deep breath and said, "This is it. This is the time." I knew every single thing that I had to do was going to make noise. I was able to push the vacuum cleaner that was hanging out of the closet into the closet and open the door all at the same time. And so I did all of that and ran.
She ran for her life through the parking lot in front of the first car that she saw.
There were two men in the car, and I ran out in front of the car, and they stopped. I went up to the passenger side, and I said, I was kidnapped, I was sexually assaulted, I still had the handcuffs hanging from my wrist. I held them up while I was talking to them and showed them to them, and they said, "What do you want us to do? What should we do?"
She pleaded with them to take her to the nearest police station. But before they left, Kara pointed to the apartment she had just escaped from and said to the men, "Remember that door." The men drove Kara to the Richland County Sheriff's Department to tell her terrifying story.
She's got handcuffs on her. She's, you can tell something's going on. And she tells us that she's been kidnapped and sexually assaulted.
As the investigator began interviewing her, she recounted every detail of the 18 hours spent with her kidnapper.
It's like memory dump. I had to get everything out. I said, I remember this, and he's writing it all down. I had the handcuffs. I had the leg restraint still on my leg at that point. I don't think they had any choice but to believe me.
We were just totally amazed that she was able to go through what she did, and the survival instincts and that will that she had within her to escape and to play him. She realized what she had to do to survive. All the time she's planning, how am I going to escape? What am I going to be able to do? That was the survival instinct that she had, and it worked. And when the moment came that she had an opportunity to escape, she did it.
Investigators found the missing persons report Kara's mother had filed the night before and immediately notified her that her daughter was safe.
I heard her on the phone. He said, "Miss Robinson, we have your daughter." And I could hear her on the phone. I could hear her say, "Kara, you have Kara?" And I could hear her voice. It's just filled with more emotion than I've ever heard in anyone's voice. And I knew at that point that I'd done it, that I'd gotten away.
Police focused on finding Kara Robinson's abductor. The men who had rescued the 15-year-old told investigators they had found Kara in the parking lot at the Crossroads apartment complex. Detectives brought Kara back there, hoping she could tell them which apartment she had escaped from.
She couldn't exactly tell which apartment. She felt like we were in the right place. She recognized where she'd ran out. The guys also said this is where we picked her up at, but she didn't know exactly which apartment it was.
But Kara did remember the car her attacker drove. Investigators questioned the residents of the apartment complex, hoping to connect the vehicle to someone who lived there.
We knew what car he'd used. And we asked, did anybody drive that car? And somebody said, yeah, the gentleman who lives in this apartment here has that type of car.
The man's name was Richard Marc Evonitz. Police were surprised to learn the man was married. Neighbors said he and his wife lived in apartment 301, and Evonitz had left in a big hurry earlier that morning.
We started doing background on him. We started looking for him.
Detectives sent out an all-points bulletin for Evonitz and put a trace on his cell phone. They were able to track the phone to a motel about an hour outside of Columbia, South Carolina.
We went there, and we were about 2 hours behind him. He left before we got there.
An interstate manhunt was launched, but for days, Evonitz managed to elude authorities. Then, a member of his family gave investigators a critical tip. His sister said Evonitz had asked her to meet him at a pancake house in Bradenton, Florida. Police staked out the location.
He was actually across the street hiding and watching, and he saw law enforcement.
Evonitz took off, but authorities were quickly in hot pursuit. The high-speed chase went on for miles until police were finally able to corner him.
They blew his tires. He still kept going. He's going down the highway, sparks flying, rims hitting the road, and he was staying ahead of them until he tried to cross a median strip, and he's surrounded.
Police were moving in to arrest Evonitz when he pulled a gun.
Evonitz takes the gun, puts it in his mouth, and pulls the trigger.
Kara Robinson heard about her attacker's death in the safety of her South Carolina home.
I felt a little cheated for a moment. I think there was a little something inside of me who wanted this guy to get arrested and wanted this case to go to trial. I wanted to sit across from him in a courtroom. I wanted him to look at me and know that I was the biggest mistake he ever made. Choosing me and thinking that I was weak, that was the biggest mistake he ever made.
Police got a search warrant and began going through Evonitz's apartment. Inside a locked box, they found evidence of a link to more serious crimes.
And we opened it up, and it was just like things that he had collected that people keep. And there was a newspaper. It described the missing girls from Virginia and had been murdered.
Investigators look for a connection between Evonitz and the Silva Lisk murders.
They realized that, yes, there was Marc Evonitz who lived in Spotsylvania at the time that the Lisk girls and Sophia Silva went missing.
Sheriff Lott called investigators in Spotsylvania. He told them he had evidence that Evonitz might be the killer they had been searching for.
We found out where he worked, went in, we pulled his work records, and found out that on the days that Sophia and Kristen and Katie were abducted, he was not working those days. And he lived within miles, a few miles, of both those locations.
The pieces of a disturbing puzzle were starting to come together. But investigators needed more proof. They tested the hair and fiber evidence found during the Silva and Lisk cases against evidence collected from Evonitz's car. The FBI lab reported they were a match, and there was even more damning proof.
When they searched his vehicle, they found Kristen's fingerprint on the inside of the trunk.
Even after 5 years, it was still there, plain as day. Kristen Lisk's fingerprint, the fibers, and the hair gave investigators all the proof they needed. Marc Evonitz was the man who had kidnapped and killed Sophia Silva and the Lisk girls.
The link with the evidence from Sophia's from Sophia's case to Kristen and Katie's, and then from the fingerprint from Kristen being found in the trunk, it tied Richard Evonitz to all three girls.
The sheriff in Spotsylvania made the tearful announcement at a news conference.
Our hope today is that this announcement gives you some answers to your many questions, and that it may bring you some small amount of closure and comfort in knowing that the individual responsible has been identified and is no longer in a position to harm anyone.
Spotsylvania's long nightmare was finally over. Kara Robinson's courage in the face of a terrible assault had brought Evonitz's killing spree to an end.
There's some very special people in the world that you have contact with, and she's one of those. It's just what she was able. You don't see adults be able to do this, and here she is, a 15-year-old young girl who just the courage and the will to survive that she had, it just made her special. Even though it had killed itself, he could have still had control over her the rest of her life if she would have allowed it, and she didn't. From day one, she was not going to let him take her life away.
But Kara refuses to see herself as a heroine or a victim. She has become a police officer and believes her story can show others how to overcome the traumas of violent crime.
I think a survivor, that is a word that says something happened to you, but you were strong enough to overcome it. I'm going to take that bad thing that happened, and I'm going to take the positive away from it. I'm going to take it, I'm going to learn, I'm going to grow, I'm become a stronger person. I'm going to become a better person because of what happened to me.
Kara doesn't believe Marc Evonitz abided by the law during the 5 years between the List murders and her abduction, and fears he may be responsible for other unsolved crimes. She hopes that going public with her story convinces anyone with any information about other attacks to contact police. Join us next time when we're back on the case.